When I was a kid, every summer my mother would take me to my grandmother's house to visit her. I was always excited because she would always tell me such interesting stories. Because my mother had a lot of work to do in the city and would return here to pick me up in 2 weeks, my grandma immediately told me a very interesting story to console me. Her family was a wealthy family in the area at the time, and she was very attractive. That was why, despite the fact that she was only 16 years old, many people approached her for matchmaking. One day, a family approached the matchmaker and asked her to assist them in proposing to marry my grandmother. After the matchmaker spoke with her father, which was my great-grandfather, he seemed to be pleased with the other family, so he cheerfully told her to set a date for the two sides to meet. A few days later, the other family made an appointment to meet, and the two families enjoyed some tea and a joyful conversation. Fortunately, the couple fell in love with each other at the first sight. They couldn't take their eyes off each other and decided to come together. He rode a donkey to meet her every few days. Because the two villages were quite far apart and he had to cross a forest, sometimes he was simply going to see her for a few minutes and then giving her a cake or a small gift just to see her. Then he hurried back home on his donkey, because if he stayed any longer the journey back would be even more dangerous. The two agreed to meet again a few days before the wedding. He rummaged through his pockets and began to pull something out. After a while of searching, he pulled out a beautiful and sparkling golden hairpin from his shirt. He stated that this would be an engagement gift, and that when he picked her up as a bride, he would like her to bring it along. She was both surprised and moved by this. The hairpin was exquisitely sculpted, resembling a flower in full bloom. She didn't dare to use it because it was too beautiful. Part of her wanted to keep it for the consummation night, so she carefully stored it in a wooden box lined with red fabric. Soon after, the wedding day arrived. She put on stunning makeup and a crimson bridal gown. Her hand was still holding the box containing the gold hairpin as she sat on the bride's palanquin. There were drums and trumpets outside making cheerful sounds, and her brother followed to take her to the husband's house. Suddenly, she heard her brother talking loudly outside. She realized the group was being pursued by robbers. Her brother advised her to stay inside and never go outside because he was concerned about her. Despite her fears, she made sure to carefully place the box containing the gold brooch in the sealed trunk under the bride's chair. Because she was too worried, she secretly lifted the curtain and peered outside to see how things were going. At the time, she noticed that in addition to the bride's procession group, there were some other strange men, that the two sides were fighting fiercely, and that the robbers were extremely daring. However, it appeared that the bandits were weaker, so after a while they were quickly defeated by the bride procession group and her brother. She was relieved to see this, so she closed the curtain and sat down on the chair to relax. Soon after, she couldn't hear the noise outside anymore, and the palanquin began to move and was lifted. She assumed that the robbery issue had been resolved, but because everyone was so quiet, she inquired outside. But no one responded. Instead, the sound of drums continued, but it was not lively as it had been. She was terrified as she listened closely, because the drum trumpet was no longer playing happy songs, but rather funeral music. She hastily opened the curtains to look outside and look for her brother, feeling increasingly strange. The person carrying the palanquin in front of her, however, was not at all like the original group. His hairstyle and even his clothes were unusual, which surprised her. What was more terrifying was that the people carrying the palanquin had no legs at all, as if they were floating through the air. One of them turned to look at her after hearing the noise coming from the palanquin. Now she could clearly see his face was pale and looked like sores, and his eyes were lifeless. It terrified her so much that she screamed and retreated into the palanquin, not daring to look. They didn't seem to care about her and continued to carry the palanquin forward. In fear, she jumped out of the palanquin, hoping no one would notice. Therefore, she slipped and fell, landing on the road with her head hit on a roadside stone. It caused her head to bleed profusely, as well as fatigue in her body. Despite the fact that she could now flee, she recalled the golden hairpin he had given her, which was still in the palanquin. With tears in her eyes, she decided to take another risk and return to find the group of people who were carrying the palanquin. They didn't seem to notice or care that she had jumped out of the palanquin. Except for their frightening appearances, everything appeared to be a normal wedding ceremony with trumpets and drums and music. Someone was still carrying a large wooden trunk containing dowry behind them. But these people looked scary. Also, their skin was grey, their eyes were white with no irises. They appeared lifeless. It was a wedding ceremony, but it was a gloomy one. So she kept a low profile, hiding behind the bushes on the side of the road so no one would notice. The palanquin was also stopped and placed on the ground after more than 30 minutes. On closer inspection, however, this area seemed to be a mass burial area with numerous large and small graves. They gathered in front of the largest of them all and dug with their hands. The outer layer of soil and rock was removed, revealing a large coffin within. They took a gold hairpin box and placed it above the coffin. It was like returning items to their rightful owner. Finally, they filled the tomb with dirt to return to its original state, bowed a few times and then vanished. Hiding behind, she was watching everything and feeling extremely strange and curious. They had almost no intention of harming her. However, witnessing such a strange thing made her extremely scared, intending to follow to retrieve the gold hairpin, but it had now been buried inside the grave. So she fled in the opposite direction, hoping to run to join her bride possession group or someone who could assist her. Finally, she didn't know how long she ran for, possibly more than an hour, when she met her brother, who was looking for her everywhere because she had suddenly vanished. She finally dared to breathe a sigh of relief and hug her brother as soon as she saw him. Then she told her brother everything, and she wanted the entire group to accompany her to find the graves. However, for some reason, the group searched for a long time but did not discover any of the graves she described. Because things did not go as planned, both families agreed to reschedule the wedding ceremony for a more auspicious date. Following the marriage ceremony, the couple was required to go and greet elderly members of the husband's family, to whom they related the events of the previous day. So he suddenly remembered an old story, most likely related to the incident of the bride procession group. In the past, this land had a young king who ruled cruelly, making people miserable. But his reign was brief, and he died when he was just over 40 years old. The people who lived there began to disperse and moved to other villages and lands to live. A large tomb was built for him, but no one took care of it. According to legend, the gold hairpin was left to him by his late wife and was buried with him when he died. However, because no one cared for him, his grave was soon dug up by grave robbers who stole the golden hairpin. Coincidentally, she brought the hairpin and passed by near the grave on the day of the wedding. Perhaps they had been looking for the hairpin for a long time, as it was also the object of the old owner.